Welcome to Creepy Night, where shadows speak and stories never truly die. Tonight, we open another tale, one whispered through fog, born of fear, and written in blood. So, turn off the lights and listen.
Elias Thorne arrived at Blackwood Manor under a sky heavy with clouds, the late afternoon sun scarcely penetrating the pall of mist that clung to the grounds like a shroud. The carriage wheels sank into the soft earth of the overgrown drive, and the faint creak of wrought iron gates announcing his arrival sounded as though the house itself had whispered a warning. Winty, the manor, inherited from a distant uncle, whose existence had been more rumor than reality, rose before him, a monument to decay, its slate roof patched in haste, the once proud stone walls now marred with creeping ivy, and windows darkened by years of neglect. Though the house was austere, there was a peculiar grandeur to it, a resonance that stirred a strange, unnameable longing in Elias's chest. He recalled the letters that had summoned him, formal, restrained, and yet carrying an almost urgent insistence, as though the writer, long dead, had known his fate would one day converge here. The very air smelled of damp wood and forgotten things, a perfume both melancholic and intoxicating, as though the house exhaled centuries of secrets with each draught of wind. The hall into which Elias stepped was vast and cavernous, a mausoleum of echoes. Dust motes danced in the narrow streams of light from the high windows, and a solitary chandelier hung from the ceiling, like a pendulous skeleton of opulent design. The furnishings were draped in moth-eaten covers. Carpets had gathered the size of countless footsteps. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow him with a judgment both patient and inexorable. As Elias crossed the threshold, he felt a sensation akin to falling, as if the house had inhaled his presence and was already assimilating him into its shadowed corridors. He explored room after room, cataloging the furniture and drapery, the mantelpieces upon which the ashes of long-dead fires lay thick. A library drew him most persistently. Rows upon rows of tomes, leather-bound and lined with the scent of age and mildew, seemed to murmur amongst themselves. Some titles were familiar, many arcane. Latin and Greek, French and German, a chorus of tongues speaking of knowledge and folly alike. He ran his fingers along the spines, each touch stirring the ghosts of scholars long vanished, and in one corner discovered a writing desk partially concealed beneath a velvet throw. It was here, in this neglected study, that Elias first encountered the object that would irrevocably shape his destiny. Beneath a layer of dust and time, a small drawer resisted his initial attempts to open it, as though it had grown obstinate over decades of solitude. At last, with a careful twist of the worn brass key, he found dangling from the lock. The drawer yielded, revealing a singular treasure, a ring of the most exquisite craftsmanship, set with a dark, lustrous gem that seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. Its band bore intricate engravings, delicate filigree that twisted like curling vines around a miniature crest, the meaning of which eluded him. Alongside the ring lay a slip of yellowed parchment, its edges frayed and brittle. The handwriting was precise, deliberate, and cold with authority. To the possessor of this trinket I entreat caution. Do not place it upon your finger. It has claimed the souls of those before you, and it will not release you willingly. To wear it is to bind yourself, body and mind, to a fate that is no longer your own. Elias felt a shiver traverse the length of his spine. 1,000 rational objections surged through his mind. Skepticism, reason, the voice of prudence. Yet the ring called to him with a beauty that was both alluring and unnatural. It seemed almost sentient, a quiet pulse emanating from the gem, like the heartbeat of something alive, waiting and aware. He hesitated, aware that he ought to retreat, yet an irresistible curiosity drew him nearer. As twilight fell, and the house exhaled its first night-long sigh, Elias placed the ring upon his finger. The instant it settled against his skin, a tremor ran through him, subtle yet profound, as if the ring had recognized its new master. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to lengthen and gather, stretching toward him with an intent that was not entirely benign. The candlelight flickered, and in the mirror above the mantelpiece, Elias glimpsed his reflection, yet it was not wholly his own. The eyes that met his were slightly altered, deeper, darker, as though a layer of himself had already been siphoned into some unseen reservoir. Sleep that night was fraught with unrest. In dreams, he wandered through halls he had never seen, lined with mirrors that reflected not his own face, but the visages of countless others, men and women, whose eyes glimmered with silent dread. A voice, soft as a sigh yet insistent as a command, whispered from the darkness, "You are ours now. You cannot remove it. You cannot resist." Morning brought no solace. In the daylight, the manor seemed alive with an unspoken awareness. The portraits along the walls appeared to shift imperceptibly, their gazes following him with a sentience that he could not rationalize. Every surface he touched seemed imbued with latent intent. The floorboards creaked under his steps in patterns that echoed the rhythm of his own pulse. And through it all, the ring remained, unyielding, patient, and quietly triumphant. Day. Over the following days, Elias explored further. He discovered letters tucked into the shelves of the library, diaries of ancestors who had lived and died within the house, their entries growing increasingly frenzied, as though chronicling the same descent that he had yet to experience. One spoke of a distant relative, perhaps the first to encounter the ring, whose disappearance remained unexplained. Another recounted sleepless nights spent listening to whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls, voices that promised wisdom, power, and liberation, while slowly draining the self from the listener. Yet the more he learned, the more he was compelled to wear the ring. Rationality warred with obsession, but the allure of the jewel, the pull of its impossible beauty, and the promise of secrets beyond comprehension were irresistible. And Elias sensed, though he scarcely admitted it to himself, that the ring was aware, watching, choosing him, binding him in ways both overt and subtle. Blackwood Manor, in its solitude and decay, became both sanctuary and prison. Every creak of timber, every rustle of wind through the broken windows, carried with it a sense of purpose, a deliberate orchestration that Elias could not fully perceive. He was no longer merely a visitor. He was an intruder upon a ritual set in motion long before his birth, one whose conclusion he might never witness, but whose inevitability he already felt in the marrow of his bones. Thus, Elias Thorne began his tenure at Blackwood Manor, unaware that the very inheritance he had so eagerly accepted contained not merely bricks and mortar, but a force older and more cunning than any he had encountered. "Why, oh!" The ring pulsed upon his finger, and within its dark facets, the promise of eternity whispered, and the house waited, patient as stone, for the full measure of its claim. By the end of that first week, Elias understood one truth with chilling clarity. He was no longer the master of his own fate. The ring had begun its work, and he, despite every instinct, had welcomed it. The days at Blackwood Manor wore upon Elias Thorne like a slow, relentless tide. The ring, now inseparable from his finger, seemed to thrum with a quiet vitality, responding to the rhythm of his pulse as though it had become a part of him. Each morning he would awaken with a faint warmth around his hand, an almost imperceptible tug that drew his consciousness to the dark gem set upon his finger. The warnings of the yellowed note, so stark, so final, resonated in his mind only faintly, drowned by a fascination that had grown into something more insidious: desire. It began subtly. Mirrors, once mere reflections of his form, now betrayed anomalies. Shadows lingered too long behind him, stretching, curling, and recoiling with a life of their own. The mirror in the library, a grand relic framed with ebony and silver, seemed to ripple when he approached, as though the glass itself were fluid, and he caught glimpses of faces not his own. Faces etched with anguish, yet eyes that glimmered with a knowing intelligence. Elias blinked, rubbed the glass, but each time the sensation returned. The ring pulsed in quiet affirmation, as if whispering, "See what you were meant to see. Touch what you were meant to touch." Books became his companions, yet they, too, spoke in new ways. Letters and tomes he had skimmed before now revealed hidden annotations, almost imperceptible script curling in margins, offering advice and admonitions in a voice that was not printed, but alive. A phrase here, a sentence there, as though the very paper carried the consciousness of the ring itself. Elias read, fascinated, his nights consumed with study, his sleep increasingly haunted by whispers that curled into his ears like smoke. "We await. You are ready. You will join us soon." Nay, yea. It was in these nocturnal hours that the first dreams arrived, visions of the ring's previous wearers, long forgotten by history, each a shadow of the man or woman they had once been. They wandered endless halls, their reflections absorbed into glass and stone, their faces pale, eyes wide with terror, yet strangely serene. The whispers in the dreams were persuasive, coaxing, promising understanding and knowledge far beyond mortal comprehension. Elias awoke each morning with the taste of iron in his mouth, the echo of voices lingering long after he had opened his eyes. By day, the effects were subtler, but no less real. He found himself pausing before mirrors, the urge to touch the ring growing almost unbearable. On more than one occasion, he caught himself staring at his reflection for minutes at a time, only to notice that the eyes in the mirror no longer mirrored his own entirely. They darkened at intervals, pulsing with a silent rhythm, and for a fleeting moment, he felt he saw the rings were writ upon them, a script older than the house itself, demanding obedience. The house responded too. Blackwood Manor had begun to feel alive, as though the stones and timbers themselves were attentive to his presence. Doors that had once been stubborn now opened at a glance, hallways stretched longer, or contracted according to some unseen intention, and the wind through broken windows carried voices that were nearly intelligible. Wadika. When he walked the halls, he sensed eyes upon him, though no living creature could be found. Footsteps echoed in patterns he did not dictate. He was not alone, though he could see no one. The house had awoken. Elias's days became consumed by the compulsion to examine the ring, to explore its history, and to test the limits of its power. He discovered ancient documents hidden behind loose stones in the library walls, diaries of those who had previously worn the ring, each account more harrowing than the last. Some described the creeping erosion of self, the way desires and fears were subtly manipulated. Others spoke of madness, of secrets whispered in the dead of night, until the wearer could no longer distinguish between dream and waking, self and artifact. Elias devoured these accounts, each word tightening the unseen chain around his will, each tale reinforcing a fascination he could neither resist nor condemn. One evening, as rain lashed against the gabled windows and the wind carried the mournful cries of distant trees, Elias lingered in the study longer than usual. Candlelight flickered across the ring's dark gem, and he found himself speaking aloud, though no one else was present. "What are you? What do you want of me?" The reply came not in sound but sensation. The gem pulsed in reply, a warmth that spread through his veins, and for a fleeting instant, he felt the consciousness of those who had come before, their memories brushing against his mind like the wings of restless moths. A voice, faint yet undeniable, threaded through the quiet of the room. "We see through you. We speak through you. You are ours. You have chosen. There is no undoing." A shiver raced down Elias's spine, yet fascination overpowered fear. He pressed the ring to the candlelight, noting how its facets absorbed every flicker, every shadow, until it seemed to draw the flame into itself. He felt the inexorable allure of its power, the way it promised dominion over unseen forces, knowledge beyond mortal reach, and the intoxicating sensation of unity with something vast and eternal. He could feel his own heartbeat in tandem with the gem's silent rhythm, a reminder that the ring had entwined itself irrevocably with his life. Isolation became complete. Servants had long been dismissed, having departed under vague pretexts, and the village lay far below the hill, its people either fearful or indifferent. Elias spent hours walking the hallways in the dark, the ring guiding him, opening doors and revealing chambers that seemed hidden from previous visitors. Each room offered glimpses of shadows, of reflections that were not entirely his own, and the whispers became constant companions, encouraging, advising, testing the limits of his obedience. By the end of the fortnight, Elias Thorne could no longer recall precisely where his thoughts ended, and the ring's influence began. Sleep had become a battleground of voices, visions, and premonitions. Waking life, a succession of subtle, almost imperceptible manipulations. Yet still, he could not remove the ring. Any attempt to do so was met with pain, with a suffocating pressure that seemed to emanate from the gem itself. It had chosen him, and he, despite every instinct, had submitted. The temptation of the ring was no longer merely a curiosity or a fascination. It was an omnipresent force, a seduction of will and spirit, and Elias understood, with a dawning horror and a perverse thrill, that he was no longer merely its possessor. He was, in some small, irreversible way, becoming a part of it. A new whisper in the chorus, a new shadow in the endless reflection, waiting for the next moment to exert influence upon the world. The ring had claimed its first days, and Elias knew, even if he would not admit it, that this was only the beginning. The nights at Blackwood Manor had grown long, oppressive, and utterly unyielding. By the third week of Elias Thorne's residence, sleep was no longer a refuge, but a threshold to a realm of whispers, shadows, and visions that clung to him with a tenacity he could neither fight nor fully comprehend. Each evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon and the manor exhaled its first long sigh, the ring upon his finger pulsed with a faint, insistent warmth, as if aware of the encroaching darkness and eager to draw him within. At first, the whispers were subtle, soft rustlings that trailed at the edge of hearing, like the murmur of wind through half-opened shutters, or the faint susurries of distant waves. Elias would pause in the library or the long corridor leading to the study, his hand hovering instinctively over the ring, and the voices would fade, leaving him trembling and uncertain of what was real. Yet the very uncertainty only drew him deeper, compelling him to seek the source of the sound, to press his ear closer to the dark gem, as though listening might unlock a secret knowledge denied to the living. The ring's influence over his perception grew with every passing day. Mirrors became portals to an alternate reflection, one in which his eyes seemed hollowed, darker, yet alive with the glimmer of unseen observers. At times, he glimpsed figures lurking behind him, fleeting shadows that vanished when he turned, leaving only the whispering wind and the oppressive quiet of the house. And always, the ring pulsed with an internal rhythm, a heartbeat that matched, yet occasionally outran, his own way now. Elias felt that it was attuned not merely to his body, but to the very essence of his being. It was in the dead hours of a moonless night that the true visions began. In dreams that were more real than waking, Elias found himself wandering endless halls, corridors whose architecture defied logic and memory. Doors opened into rooms he had never seen, yet the details were achingly familiar. The rich scent of old parchment, the chill of damp stone beneath foot, the soft, almost inaudible echo of a heartbeat that was not his own. Figures appeared, draped in shadow, faces indistinct, but their eyes unmistakably human, filled with terror, pleading, or grim resignation. These were the previous wearers of the ring, their souls ensnared, their wills consumed. They whispered to him, not with words, but with thoughts, each message layered, subtle, yet inescapable. Do not resist. You are chosen. We await you. The ring will not release you. One night, Elias awoke from these dreams drenched in sweat, the taste of iron and ash lingering upon his tongue. The waking world seemed altered, the manor more alive, more attentive, as though the house itself had become a co-conspirator in his undoing. Floorboards creaked in anticipatory rhythm. Doors that had once resisted his touch now swung open with almost expectant ease. And shadows moved with deliberate purpose, curling toward him only to vanish when confronted directly. He began to feel the presence of unseen eyes in every corner, at every threshold. The house watched, and the ring amplified its gaze. Daylight offered scant reprieve. Elias found that he could not leave the manor's grounds without an uneasy compulsion to return. The village, distant and indifferent, had become a realm of irrelevance, its people mere background noise to the singular focus consuming his days. The ring. He found himself lingering over manuscripts, diaries, and letters he discovered hidden in the walls and floors of Blackwood Manor. Each contained accounts of the cursed artifact, some written in trembling ink, others in the jagged, hurried scroll of minds fraying under invisible pressure. The chronicles detailed the inexorable influence of the ring. Desires twisted into obsession, nights filled with voices that promised knowledge and power. Identities slowly dissolved into the gem's unfathomable consciousness. One diary, belonging to a distant ancestor whose name Elias had not previously encountered, spoke of a moment strikingly akin to his own. I placed it upon my finger, and it was as if 1,000 eyes opened within me. I felt their thoughts, their sorrows, their triumphs, and their endless waiting. Sleep became a torment. Waking was no relief. And yet, I could not, would not remove it. I am its vessel, and I know the end is not on. Now, the parallel sent a shiver down Elias's spine, yet fascination overpowered fear. The ring's allure was irresistible. It had become a part of him in ways that went far beyond the flesh. His reflection, once merely altered, now seemed inhabited by another consciousness. A subtle overlay that watched him from behind his own eyes, a spectral companion whose existence he could not deny. The gem's pulse, steady and persistent, echoed in his chest, as if reminding him that separation was impossible. By the 4th week, Elias's obsession had deepened into compulsion. His waking hours were consumed with studying the ring, experimenting with its boundaries, and attempting, however futilely, to comprehend its purpose. He discovered a hidden compartment beneath the study floorboards, containing a series of etched tablets, each chronicling the experiences of previous wearers. Some described grandiose visions, others confessions of moral transgressions committed under the ring's influence, and all spoke of the inexorable descent into subjugation. Yet the pattern was clear. None had resisted successfully. None had survived intact. Despite the warnings, Elias was drawn ever closer to the ring's whispered promises. One night, as a storm raged across the hills, lightning illuminating the manor's decaying facade, he felt compelled to speak aloud to the gem. "What is it you wish of me? What knowledge do you offer that I cannot attain on my own?" The reply was immediate, not in sound but sensation, a vibration that coursed through his veins, warm and insistent, compelling yet terrifying. Visions flooded his mind, fleeting impressions of distant lands, long-lost secrets, and the faces of those who had worn the ring before him, their expressions a kaleidoscope of fear, despair, and resigned surrender. They crowded around him, pressing against the boundaries of thought and memory, and he understood with a clarity that was both exhilarating and horrifying. The ring sought not merely obedience, but assimilation. Sleep became a battleground. The previous wearers appeared in his dreams, some pleading for deliverance, others silent and inscrutable. The whispers were relentless, threading through the fabric of night like a dark tapestry of fate. They spoke of the ring's patience, its cunning, its inexorability. They revealed that resistance was futile, that the gem had chosen him, and that with each passing night, his identity, the sum of his desires, fears, and memories, was being catalogued, absorbed, and rewritten by an intelligence beyond comprehension. Elias awoke one morning to find that he could no longer remember the exact color of the gem in daylight. In the dim candlelight of the study, it seemed darker, more potent, absorbing all light rather than reflecting it. The mirrors throughout the manor had become portals, reflecting not just his image, but glimpses of other lives, other souls, entwined with the ring. And always the whispering persisted, a constant susurration that threaded through the walls, the floorboards, and his own mind. "You are ours. We see you. You are chosen. You cannot resist." The compulsion to remain within the manor was absolute. Any attempt to leave, even for brief walks in the distant village, was met with a suffocating sense of dread and an almost physical pull back to the house. The ring's grip was both psychological and supernatural, entwining his will with an invisible cord that tightened with every heartbeat. He began to understand the grim truth. The house, the ring, and the whispers were not separate entities. They were facets of the same force, patient, eternal, and utterly indifferent to his mortality. As days bled into nights and nights into days, Elias's reflection became increasingly alien. He could feel the consciousness within the ring brushing against his own, probing, assessing, insinuating itself into thought and memory. The sensation was addictive, terrifying, and intimate, like staring into a mirror that not only reflected, but also contained a hidden truth. He could see the shape of himself fading, the contours of his identity softening under the gem's silent insistence. And yet, he could not remove it. The very thought brought a shuddering pain, a reminder that the ring's choice was irrevocable. Isolation, obsession, and subtle terror merged into a single unbroken state of existence. The manor was no longer merely a dwelling. It had become a vessel, an extension of the ring's will. Shadows deepened and stretched, doors and windows shifted, and the whispers continued unabated. Elias walked the halls, listening, watching, feeling the presence of countless souls absorbed by the artifact before him. Each whisper, each flicker of movement, reminded him that resistance was meaningless. The ring was patient. The ring was inevitable.